Our next speaker is Boris Mati from Afghanistan. Is that you? Or no? No, that's the next. That's the last one. Well, the next one would be from Afghanistan. Okay. Is that?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes life throws us a pleasant surprise, and on Tuesday we were told that we were to do a presentation on our groundwater models in Afghanistan rather than just a poster. So it's my privilege today to report on the work being done by Dr. Boris Mati, who is in Kabul at present, and I'll basically go through the work that he's doing over the next few minutes. This works. No, it doesn't. Boris works in Kabul in Mufti. He goes around disguised as a Pashto tribesman. You can see a picture of him at the bottom left corner there. And he's been working on the development of the groundwater models over the past year and a half. I'm going to go through 9 items today, basically divided between the regional model for Kabul and then site-specific MAR models. These are tools which we are expected to develop by the USAID and the Asian Development Bank for trial testing of MAR technologies, then ultimately as tools for management of MAR over a 10 to 15 year period starting in 2020. We're following for the regional models, we're following a 6-step program, basically starting with conceptualization, then development of the numerical model, supporting that with regional studies, and then applying the work to more site-specific situations, and then ultimately leading on to management tools for MAR in the long term. Little bit about Kabul and the area we're modeling. The area is outlined with the black lines on the satellite map you can see there, and effectively we are modeling the plains of Kabul rather than the mountains which surround Kabul and intersect the middle of it. Little bit about the city to give you an appreciation of the area that we're modeling. We're modeling the plain, which you can see with the large urban area at the bottom left. It's a large modern city of over 4 million people. It gets a bad press, but it is in general quite a pleasant place to live in. The mountains which separate eastern and western Kabul have 2 passes, and one of these passes you can see at the top left corner, and it basically permits the pass permits the transfer of water from western to eastern Kabul. The pass which you see in the top right-hand corner is the exit point of all surface and groundwater from Kabul. Basically, the groundwater is forced close to the surface, or actually to the surface, and flows as the Kabul River to Pakistan. It's quite an infamous pass. It was in the 1840s, an entire British army was killed with only 1 survivor as they withdrew from Kabul in the first Anglo-Afghan War. The bottom right picture shows the Kabul River as it currently is flowing through the center of Kabul. It has a lot of particulate matter as a result of rainfall, and it flows in general between 20 cubic meters a second and 100 cubic meters a second at this time of the year, depending on the amount of precipitation. We've carried out regional studies to develop the groundwater models, and these you can see conceptually shown on the diagram here with inputs and outputs to the model. The inputs are in general estimated. The outputs are a result of detailed well inventory and abstraction measurements at well sites. I've also marked on this map or diagram the positions of our trial MAR facilities, which I previously just described a few days ago. They're basically spreading basins, injection wells, and impounded water, which with above ground intake structures to permit water to be gravity fed into the ground. The results of these field surveys have allowed us to produce water table stroke piezometric maps of the city. Water levels, or these groundwater levels, fall about 50 meters from the southwest to the northeast under natural conditions. Unfortunately now, particularly in the west of the city, the situation is greatly distorted by substantial groundwater mining. The data which we've gathered from our field investigations, be it the drilling of piezometers or from well inventory, have allowed us to produce aquifer thickness maps. And we're basically modeling using fee flow 4 layers, a lowest cover which is not totally ubiquitous across the city, but almost ubiquitous, with very low permeability. Then we have a shallow quaternary gravels. They're prominent adjacent to the rivers. And then we have the neogene conglomerates. The upper neogene is not that permeable. The lower neogene is a significant deeper aquifer in Kabul. The information with regard to the geometry, particularly of the lower neogene, has been generated by work done by JICA, the Japanese development agency. They drilled about 10 years ago 8 boreholes across the city, which has given information regarding particularly the depth of the deeper aquifer, which goes as deep as 600 meters. The shallower aquifers, we've drilled ourselves 40 piezometers to get geological control and groundwater level measurements. And that, together with digital terrain models, have given us good control of the geometry of the shallow aquifer and the occurrence of loess. Boundary conditions for Boris's models. Boris has used fixed heads where rivers enter the system, and you can see the Kabul River and the Pagman River entering in the west of the city. In the south, you have the Logar River. These are marked by green at the peripheral of the model, and they're basically fixed heads. At the extreme north-west, you can see there are flow boundaries, and also at the extreme southeast, there are flow boundaries. The southeast flow boundary represents the Logar River, which feeds the alluvial aquifer. In fact, it's an area where German aid have put in a lot of induced infiltration boreholes to facilitate water supply. In the northwest, the flow boundary basically represents flow which is coming off the mountains, which are impermeable, and enters coarse gravels at the peripheral edge of the mountains where it touches the plain. We've done some trial runs of the models to date, basically looking at inflows and outflows for the with respect to the boundary conditions, and we're not far off having it properly balanced. We've got a root mean square error now of about 10%, but it is a work in progress, and I don't expect to have this process completed until another year or two, when we have more data. Key issues with the models that we have given particular attention to are the choke points between east and west Kabul, and the amount of flow which is transferred across at present, which is about 5,000 meters cubed per day. We've also been able to determine the impact of the rivers on the aquifers in Kabul. You can see where there's green, which is basically the Pagman and the Kabul rivers, the rivers contributing to the aquifer, which is very stressed in those locations. And in the east of the city, groundwater feeds the the rivers, and unfortunately what it feeds is what I euphemistically call city water. It's basically wastewater from soakaways, which gets into the shallow aquifer, then ultimately discharges into the river, and it's of extremely poor quality. The primary results which Boris has produced are basically showing that the Kabul River plays a major role in connecting the east and the west of the city. In fact, it is the connection between the two basins. And as I mentioned, the transfer amount is about 5,000 meters cubed per day. Now, the regional models are of they're a benefit for understanding what's happening across the city. But when it comes to MAR, we're also looking at more site-specific models, particularly for our spreading basins. This is an example of one of our spreading basins, both full and empty. We've constructed nested piezometers with a substantial above-ground structure which can measure water levels in the aquifers at both the shallow alluvium and the more deeper conglomerates. And this information has been applied to local models. The procedures we follow for the local models are basically 5 steps. We develop the model structure itself. We then understand the geometry of the spreading basin or of the injection well, and we then monitor. Thank you. We then monitor the changes which we produce through MAR processes on site, and then apply that to the model, and then use the results from those models for future planning purposes. The intention is ultimately to have 100 spreading basins across Kabul, and use this modeling technique for the design and operation of both spreading basins and injection wells. You can see pictures here of these schematic pictures of our spreading basin in southwest Kabul. This is a schematic representation of the type of modeling which Boris is doing with regard to spreading basins and the type of data which is input to the models. The site-specific models tend to be about 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers in footprint and about 100 meters deep in model depth. And he uses multiple layers which reflect heterogeneity in the formations which are being modeled. When we carry out, or when Boris carries out modeling with respect to spreading basins, we look at it as a spreading basin with water in contact with the base of the spreading basin, which tends to be an old quarry with either a gravel or fractured conglomerate base. But we also look at models where we help infiltration by putting above-ground intake wells into the water. And I show an example at the extreme right here of one of the wells which I've constructed elsewhere, which take above-ground intakes. And we found that although above-ground well intakes do help, they don't change the situation significantly. It might help by maybe 10 or 15, perhaps 20% increase in the infiltration in the ground, but certainly modeling results show that it doesn't have an astronomical impact. This is a schematic representation of above-ground wells that we put into the models. In the case of southwest Kabul, we put in 20 above-ground wells to see if we could actually significantly increase infiltration into the ground by a modeling determination. Unfortunately, the results are not that great. You can see at the left here the infiltration into the spreading basin modeling results, which basically raises water levels by about 70 meters over a period of time, whereas at the right, it raises it by about 100 meters over a period of time. And the cost effort of putting in the above-ground intake wells into spreading basins don't from modelling results don't seem to justify the additional expense. To actually quantify on a site-specific determination the impact of above-ground wells for assisting the spreading basin, we reckon the spreading basin itself can feed about 15,000 cubic meters a day, and if we put in above-ground wells as 20 of them, we might get an extra 4,000 cubic meters per day. So it's not considering the cost of all those wells, it's not a great improvement. So in conclusion, the work is showing that our modelled spreading basins, when it comes to design of spreading basins, we can normally get between 10 and 15,000 cubic meters a day. With a bit of extra investment with above ground intake wells, we can get an increase of maybe up to 25% more. But those above ground intake wells really require an expense justification on a site-by-site basis, and in general, I wouldn't recommend them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. That was very impressive. I'm sorry about the confusion with the speakers again. Can we just, maybe before we have questions, is the fourth speaker actually here from India? Okay. Well, then we have a bit more time. There was some confusion about the speakers. Yeah, so we can have some questions.
My question is on the boundary condition which you impose in your regional model along the river course, right? So you call it Kashi boundary condition or transfer, right? So the relation between the head in the aquifer, in the river, and the flux, right?
Right.
So
could the gentleman turn on the presentation again? I'd like to go back to that slide.
Yeah, so the Kashi or Robin are different terminologies, and we use visual mud flow. I guess in FIFLO it is the same, right? So how did you determine this coefficient, right? So to me personally, yeah, exactly, right? So the along these green lines, right? So the Kashi boundary condition. How did you determine this coefficient, and which values did you put into your model? To me, this alpha, in ModFlow it is alpha, it is usually called alpha coefficient.
No, we haven't used ModFlow. From our perspective, ModFlow has too many challenges with respect to this detailed nature of modelling. ModFlow, although it has improved in recent years, has serious challenges with wetting and drying of nodes, and it has very serious challenges with the petering out of horizontal layers. It requires layers to be continuous, although you can reduce them to a very small extent. You don't have these challenges with finite element free flow modeling. The boundary conditions, the fixed head boundary conditions related to where rivers, significant rivers enter the modeled area. And the significant rivers, which you can see in the west, are the Pagman River, which comes from the Panjshir Valley, famous valley where Ahmad Shah Massoud used to hang out. In the southwest, the Logar River, which is a Taliban-infested area at present. In the extreme south, it's the elevation of the Logar River in contact with the aquifer. These are perennial rivers in contact with the aquifer, and we've measured the elevation by differential GPS. So that's where the fixed heads at those particular points were determined. With respect to the boundary conditions at the southeast, where we have a flow, we inventoried 56 irrigation wells, which basically rely on induced infiltration from the Logar River. We measured the abstraction which is being taken from those wells, and we applied that flux as the flux into the aquifer at that location. In the extreme north-west, where the aquifer comes in contact with the mountains, we basically used an iterative process to get a match with piezometry. Now, the piezometry there is greatly distorted at present due to aquifer mining. But we do have old Russian data that goes back to the 1960s and 1970s, so we know what the piezometry was prior to the mismanagement of the aquifer, and we basically fixed the, by an iterative process, the boundary conditions in the northwest, so we could create piezometry that matched what existed in the 1970s.
No, but my condition was about the river itself, the Kissane boundary conditions, so the exchange between the river water and the surface water and the aquifer, right? So the coefficient, exchange coefficient. So where from did you get this coefficient? To me, this is what in mod flow, what is practiced usually is the alpha coefficient is fudge factor. It has no
fudge factor.
Right? So maybe in free flow it is better. I'm just wondering.
There is an element of a fudge factor in all groundwater modeling. There are significant works carried out on the particularly Kabul River on a regular basis where they clean the base of the river. So the dynamics between the riverbed and the aquifer change significantly depending on when the municipality decides to remove garbage which has accumulated at the riverbed. But we have done geotechnical sampling along the course of the riverbed, both before and after municipal cleaning exercises. So we do know how the thing changes. Prior to municipal rehabilitation, which is normally done about once a year, it's effectively impermeable. After changing its, the loess is removed, the garbage is removed, so you have direct contact with alluvial gravels, and we have the we have the permeability of those gravels, and we have the elevation of those gravels, and that's how it's determined. Okay.
Okay. Another question? Did you really say it's 100 basins will be constructed in Kabul? Did you say there will be 100 spreading basins?
Yes.
In Kabul?
Yes. We're a well-funded project. The philosophy behind the project is to make life easier for the citizens of Kabul, and they've had a very bad time over the last 40 years trying to put right the mistakes of the past is critical. And I think I have to be, there are Americans here, have to thank that nation in particular for the investment that US aid through the Asian Development Bank is putting into Kabul to right the mistakes of the past. These mistakes have been generational. They were mismanaged situations during the communist era, during the Taliban era, when the Mujahideen ran the city, there was a complete breakdown of law and order and destruction of infrastructure. And it's only now it's been put right. And certainly US aid, to a certain extent Danida of Denmark, they've been very generous in basically seeing that things which have gone wrong are being put right.
Okay, I think we may have to continue the discussion in the coffee break. And so since the fourth speaker is not here, we'll end up almost on time now. And I thank all three speakers for giving excellent presentations. And we'll have three more after the break, chaired by Rudy Rossetto. So please come back and we'll see you then.